I will be talking about what I feel is the student's perspective about traditional course materials and textbooks. When Dr. Schell first approached me with this project about switching a textbook, I thought I could really contribute to improving the experience for a lot of my peers, because textbooks are something that really impact many, if not most, students. And they are important, but they also come with some problems, and I'd like to touch upon those today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I'm sure we're all aware, textbooks are expensive, but I just wanted to point out really how expensive they can get. You can see some of these figures on the slide are above $1,000 on average of cost of textbooks for one student per year, when you can try to different strategies to decrease that cost. Yeah. But with so many students struggling to afford education, and with student debt at the situation where it is now in our country, we really don't need any additional obstacles to an affordable education for everyone. So that is an important consideration. Next slide, please. And another important consideration stems from the logistics of textbooks. And the situation is that many students wait until the beginning of the semester to order their textbooks. And then there's a lag time until they get their textbooks. So that sets students up for falling behind right from the beginning of the semester. And that's not really great for education in general, and also touches upon the issue of always being able to access your textbook when you need it, especially now in our current situation when so many students are attending class online and don't have access to, for example, library programs that would put them in touch with textbooks, and especially for the international students who can really struggle to get their hands on the required textbooks for a course. While we have those library lending programs, they aren't able to reach all the students that could use help with textbooks, because while they are a great idea, there are only so many books that they can provide, and sometimes waiting times for those books. So there's room to improve. And the last question is, when I'm finally done with a course and, for example, never want to see it again, then what do I do with that heavy $250 book? I trudge to the campus bookstore and have to sadly resell it at a fraction of the cost that I originally purchased it at. So that is not really the happiest end to the semester. And with all of those problems in mind, I'll turn it over to Dorinne, who will tell you about some ways to address those questions.
Thank you, Neringa. One solution to the problem that Neringa described is open textbooks. Hi, I'm Dorinne Banks, and I'm a research and instruction librarian at George Washington University. I also lead our library's Open Educational Resources team. And it was my role on the OER team that led me to participate in this collaborative project to switch in Dr. Schell's class the $250 textbook to a freely available open textbook. So I'm going to describe our project's process from a library's perspective. I'm just wondering, how many librarians do we have in attendance today? If you work in your library on campus, would you raise your hand? And just to reiterate, to find the raise hand, you go down to the reactions, and then you'll see the option to raise hand. So we have quite a few, and this section over the next few minutes you will find, I think, especially relevant. I propose that the library's role in solving the textbook affordability problem is twofold. Advocacy across campus is an important role that the library can play in addressing the textbook affordability problem. Our OER team built campus allies with key units such as the bookstore and the Student Government Association, and of course, academic departments and individual faculty. And our team's advocacy strategy is we identified high enrollment undergraduate courses with high cost textbook. And this is where having the campus allies really helped us. Having the registrar's office helped us identify the high enrollment courses, and the bookstore helped us identify high cost textbooks. So one of our targeted courses was the introductory level psychology course, which has many different sections. And so the OER team sent emails to all of the faculty teaching the many sections of Psych 1001. And Dr. Schell responded and indicated that he is interested in addressing the textbook affordability problem for his students. And that was the genesis of this project. The library's second role is to offer assistance in locating high quality, open source course materials. One major concern that faculty have is it takes a lot of time to switch course materials because it's not just the textbook, it's the syllabus, the PowerPoints, the tests, the assignments. And so librarians can provide valuable assistance in saving faculty members time and also using their expert search skills to locate OER materials, just bringing the message that faculty don't have to do this alone. The OER team saved Dr. Schell time by combing through several OER repositories, including Open Textbook Library, OER Commons, and a few others. And we came up with a short list of 3 open textbooks that were similar in content to the $250 textbook. We shared that list with Dr. Schell for him to review. And I always emphasize that it's the faculty member's decision about which open textbook to choose, not mine. They're the subject matter expert and the instructor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Schell and hear about the product that he chose, the OpenStax Open Textbook. Dr. Schell?
Thanks, Doreen. Before I actually get started, and if you want to go to the next slide while I'm speaking, please do. I want to say publicly my gratitude and appreciation to Doreen and her staff, and also my deep appreciation to Neringa and several other undergraduate students, including the students in a number of my classes. This project would never have been a success without them. Now, having said that, as a faculty member who has been teaching in higher ed for 35 plus years, I'm always suspect and a little bit leery with all the new things coming across my desk. So when I first heard about this, I was certainly intrigued, but I'm also very concerned about the student experience. So what I did, I actually had 4 surveys that I administered to my general psychology classes. You can see the dates there on the slides. And I wanted to find out from the student's perspective, would this be a good move or not? And so during those days, and each class had about 100 students in it. The first question that I asked students, as you see there, the price of the textbook. Was that important to students? The result, an average of 80% said it was, they strongly agreed or they agreed. So that was the first key element for me to understand what was important for them. The second question was, I prefer my textbook to be hardbound, softbound, or online. Please notice between 60 and 70% of the students selected hardbound or softbound. Now that was a little disheartening, because if that data were correct, then going this direction with an online textbook might not be the best option. But then take a look at number 3. When I asked them if they would like to have the free online book, please notice 75 to 90% said strongly agree or agree. The result was that students overwhelmingly were in favor of a free online textbook with one caveat, and that is that textbook had to have an option for a reasonably priced print version. And I've given you a look. That's a picture of the particular textbook. So I'm not done yet. I'm still concerned. Are they learning? How are they using this free online textbook? So 3 subsequent semesters, I gave the students a 9-question survey. You see the dates there. There were about 100 students in each section. And the results begin on the next slide. The results show that between 66 and 81% of the students were using the online general psych textbook. Students overwhelmingly still said the price of a textbook was important to them. Between 68 and 79% of students said the textbook was easy to use, and that was important because I wanted to make sure they were okay with it. The fourth question, we wanted to get a sense of their understanding or their experience of the readability. 62 to 75% said that it was very good. Between 16 and 32 rated it as good. The fifth question, I asked them about their perception of the overall quality of the textbook compared to other traditional textbooks that they have used, but not necessarily, of course, in psychology. There you have the results. Much higher, a big bulk, higher, about the same. The bottom line here is very few students rated the online free textbook, which also included the print versions. Very few of them rated it as poor. The sixth question, I wanted to find out from them, would they recommend I continue with this? Overwhelmingly, they said yes. Now, I also had 3 open-ended questions about what they liked and they didn't like. Time is not going to permit me to go into those details. Just very briefly, they liked the portability, they liked the ease of use. On the other hand, some of them said sometimes it was difficult to migrate through or navigate through. The bottom line was there were a lot more positive open-ended comments than negative open-ended comments. I'm very concerned about my students, as I've mentioned, although I'm not nearly as skeptical now as I was, but I have continued to have students complete this same inventory. So I continue to gather data from my psychology classes, fall of 2019, spring of 2020, and just this past semester, 100 students per class. The results were identical. Okay, and of course they're not published because this is after our chapter was published in the book. So what's the bottom line here? What is my final thought? I have two final thoughts for you. One, the adoption of an open education textbook is a winner, okay? It is an absolute winner. And the second thought, it was not the end of the world. So now that completes our formal presentation. We will certainly entertain a few questions before the next presenters go. And I'm assuming, Eileen, you might want to sort of MC this part.
I am happy to. One of the questions that came up was something that I think we're all familiar with, is the difference between, is this going to be assessment as in grading, or is this going to be assessment as in assessing the use of open, which is, now that the question was asked, it was clear like, oh yeah, we probably could have clarified that more. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of talk about grading. So a couple of the questions we have is, were you able to convince other psychology instructors to use the same book? Has there been more?
No.
Short answer, no.
No, in part because several of our faculty have published books and they're concerned about their royalties. I'll just let it at that.
Professor Schell, if you could talk a little bit about, I think Elaine was clarifying, but did you find the evaluation aspect, otherwise known as assessment, to be a lot different when you were using an open textbook than using other kinds?
Now, when you say evaluation, are you talking about grades?
Yep.
Okay, we didn't put that in, but what I did do, I actually did do a partial study comparing the grades from the last semester. I used a traditional book with the grades of the first semester with the use of the OpenStax book. The result was at the 0.001 level. Students had higher grades with the OpenStax textbook. Now, I have to qualify that. We can't say it was the OpenStax textbook that led to that, we hope, better learning, but what we can say, it did not hurt their learning. So, yes.
Oh, I have a question for me, and if I'm stepping on anyone's, there's a lot of chat, so feel free to repost. So since this was done, some of these students have presumably become psychology majors. Do we, like, one of the things I'm always curious about is that, did that create the expectation in students to say, wait a minute, why don't more people do this? Do you find students advocating more for open textbooks?
As a faculty member, I have not yet heard that.
Okay.
I have a question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question for Neringa, kind of similar to Eileen's question, but since you're a student, like, do a lot of your classmates, is this something that a lot of your classmates talk about or are passionate about? Or do you have any other classmates who have done like a similar project to this with their professors?
I'm not aware of any classmates who have done a similar project collaborating with faculty, but I do feel like, especially in the beginning of the semester, we often discuss the headache that is getting all of your textbooks together. And especially if you have a class in common and then you say, oh, have you gotten the textbook yet? Oh, no. And then there's the whole mess. So there is that definitely chatter in the beginning of the semester for sure.
And I will also say, Marilyn and Sarah both noted what I find really interesting as a philosophy librarian, which is the ethics around the conflict of interest of seeing students as the people who, the royalties for books, and thinking about promotion and tenure, right? That profiting off of one's potential students is a very odd sort of way to come about it, while at the same time recognizing, I think, that faculty who do write their own textbooks are some of the most, I think, invested in the educational aspect of for their students because they want to make sure they have the best textbook out there. And I'm always a fan of someone who's like, I'm not just going to maybe take something off the shelf. That we can have both. We can have, publish people who are writing textbooks and people who are adopting open textbooks, and recognize they're both coming from a very student-centered place. I think sometimes the ethical questions about how much someone might be profiting off it is another question, but I do think we have to recognize that probably the faculty come from the same place. They really want to make sure the students have the best access to things.
May I also say one more thing? This was labor intensive to switch. And a lot of my fellow faculty are very busy with the research and other things. And unfortunately, the teaching function sometimes gets subjugated. And I think that's another reason why many of them are not as interested.
Okay. Yeah. And I have one more follow-up, Marilyn. Is the department finding these students more engaged in their upper level courses? It would be interesting to do write a follow-up to see if they've done, and or if you'd be interested in doing a follow-up with some of those students to see how engaged they are, and if maybe that made a difference.
That is interesting. I've not thought about doing that as yet, but it is something I'll put in the back burner for the moment. I appreciate the thought.
And
welcome. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead, Marilyn.
I just think that particular aspect of all the open ed work we're doing is one that people haven't been working on, and I would love it if you, Dr. Schell, would be interested in pursuing that.
Pursuing what?
That piece of students who take subsequent courses and have been in your open education introductory course are more engaged in the upper level courses because of having, as one aspect of their experience with you, having that open resource.
Okay. I hear you. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, Eileen.
That's all right. One of the things I think that has shown this, we have librarians and faculty, and I think the more we have these conversations about uncompensated labor, I know there's a lot of faculty who are starting to, and higher up, sort of saying, wait, we should be compensating this labor. This is an issue of justice, not just for access for students, but for the work that our faculty do and our librarians do and our staff does, like to really recognize that. And I think having conversations like this, having texts like the Open Pedagogy Approaches, it shows that we understand each other's position and value each other. And I think that's fantastic. So, and we're just about at 2:30. So if we're okay, does anyone have, Elaine, yes, lack of decolonization at an institutional level. We're going to have a lot of conversations to sort of pull people along to understand how do we make things more open in a lot of the versions of that. So next we have Sarah Hutton, Lisa DiValentino from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, talking about sharing the end of the world, students' perceptions of their self-efficacy in the creation of open access digital learning objects. Take it away, end of the world, folks.
Everyone can see that? Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm Lisa DiValentino, and I'm the Law and Public Policy Librarian at the University of Massachusetts. I've been interested in open access for quite some time, at least since I was in law school, and I'm also interested in copyright and in pedagogy generally, but especially open access and the use of Creative Commons in pedagogy. So that's me.
And hello, I'm Sarah Hutton. I currently serve as the head of student success and engagement in the University Libraries at UMass Amherst. I'm also a doctoral candidate in the College of Education, where I'm also going to be teaching starting this summer. And my doctoral research is specifically in open education, student engagement, and student success. And my interest in open ed, open pedagogy, and open education practices, OEP, I've had at some level for about the past decade or so, but it's really ramped up since 2019.
All right, so we're going to talk about our chapter, the world, students' perception of their self-efficacy in the, sorry, it's covering my screen here, in the creation of open access digital learning objects. It's a very fancy title, and it's all going to make sense as we go through this presentation.
Yeah, so before discussing our course collaboration and research, Lisa's going to start out by sharing with you an excerpt from one of the final podcast assignments created by one of the student groups in the End of the World course. This is The Ghosts of Ponkapoag.
Right, so basically the project is that we were helping a faculty member who couldn't be with us, he's in DC, with his students, and their assignment was to create an podcast that would then be shared on the open internet. So here's an example of a little bit of some of that work.
Most children enjoy hearing ghost stories, but rarely do they enter one themselves. Stephen Turley and Mark Nannery were only 12 years old when they uncovered the secret of a 200-year-old Indian burial ground beneath their quiet Massachusetts town. These children accidentally shed the first light in centuries on a society once engulfed in war, indoctrinated by its leaders, murdered by its sworn protectors, and forgotten in history. Until now. The date, September 13th, 1969. The place, Canton, Massachusetts. A mystery had been brewing in the town for some time. A year earlier, a resident's dog had sauntered home carrying a human skull in its mouth that the Canton police attempted to trace to no avail, until two young boys stumbled upon the answer on that fateful September day. Stephen Turley and Mark Nannery were exploring an abandoned gravel pit in the neighborhood behind Burr Lane when they found an ancient-looking clay pipe embedded in the ground. Intrigued, the 12-year-old boys dug further, excitedly shifting through the dust and sand. What they found next was not formed out of clay.
So that audio clip was an example of the final assignment in the Sharing the End of the World political science course that we collaborated with for our research. Student groups, as Lisa mentioned, were tasked with identifying a regional to Western Massachusetts, specifically end of the world or apocalyptic scenario. And then they would engage with our special collections and university archives and other primary and secondary research resources to construct a compelling narrative of this event that could then be shared with the public through a podcast. And these podcasts, this being one of our favorites, although they're all excellent, which would tell a compelling story about the politics involved in the scenario, will be published under Creative Commons licensing and shared with a public audience. Next slide. So given the intent for these students to become creators and publish openly, we recognized a unique opportunity for collaboration. I connected with Paul early on as a library's liaison to our honors college. I saw this course syllabus passing through the approval process and was like, ding, 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 ding. There's a collaboration opportunity here for discipline-specific research and expertise in Creative Commons licensing and open works. Lisa DiValentino was a natural choice. For the media production component, the Digital Media Lab unit in my department was engaged for the support piece to ensure that the format, that production wouldn't overtake the content. I reached out to the folks who manage our institutional repository, ScholarWorks, to see about a place where we could host the student projects after they were completed. And I would serve as the overall project manager and researcher who would be looking more closely at how this course model impacted student engagement in the course content. And I'll get into that research component more in a bit, but next Lisa's going to talk a bit about our background research and some of the teaching tools that we built before designing the survey instruments.
All right, so I started out with doing a literature review because we wanted to know if anything like this had been tried before and what came of it and what the results were. I wasn't able to find anything specifically akin to what we were trying to do, but I did look at similar studies where students work was going to be made public, and not just, you know, for the instructor to grade or for their peers in the class to look at. A lot of them had to do with Wikipedia, which makes a lot of sense because Wikipedia is ubiquitous. Everyone uses it. A lot of people edit it. It's fairly easy to use once you kind of get the hang of it. And the results are kind of immediate, so you can share immediately what you write. And so a lot of the studies had the students creating or improving Wikipedia articles. And there wasn't much talk about the students' motivation in these studies. They were mostly looking at things like the students' trust in Wikipedia as a resource, whether it increased or decreased, sort of their research, how they pursued their research, you know, how they found the experience in terms of using the technology and doing the research, but it didn't really talk a lot about their motivations. What were they thinking, and did it change how they pursued the assignment because they knew that their work was going to be read by a general audience, by the public, essentially. But the ones that did sort of, there was one that kind of looked into that, and they found that the students were as motivated or more motivated than with traditional closed assignments because they knew that their work would be read by the public. And they also ended up rating their own abilities as researchers and writers higher after creating the argument. There were other studies about creating other learning objects, so not something that would necessarily be seen by the public, but at least it would be seen and used by peers, other students. So, for example, creating or helping to create an open textbook, or creating video modules or math modules or science modules for students in the lower grades, or the lower first and second year. But in these cases, when they did look at the students' feelings about their own work and their motivations, they found the students reported positively about their confidence as creators of learning objects. They reported positively on their quality of the output, and they were neutral about their motivation, which is kind of interesting, but they did feel an increased engagement, sense of personal achievement, and they felt empowered as not just as students, learners, but also as creators of resources. So having done that, we decided obviously we wanted to work very closely with the students in the classroom. And this was back when we could actually have the students come to the library and you know, interact with them in person. So what I did was I created a library guide for the course that consisted of a little explanations about copyright, about Creative Commons, about other open resources that they could use, about their rights as copyright holders, and about doing research in general, you know, having to do with political science and public policy. And I also did a presentation to the class where I touched upon these issues. So I especially wanted them not just to know about how to do research for their assignments, but also what it is that they were doing, a little bit about copyright itself, and then how to find Creative Commons licensed or open licensed resources that they could use within their podcast. So sounds, music, and that sort of thing. And we made these, this library guide is also available for anyone to look at. So if anyone's interested in it, we can put the link maybe in the, Sarah, can you put the link in the chat, which you probably already did, but I can't. I'm just looking at my screen right now. So yeah, so that was one way that I engaged with the students in person. And then of course I always made myself available if they had questions, and some of them did have questions as well. Take it away, Sarah.
Oh, okay. I'll put that link in soon. So I was just grabbing it. So, you know, as Lisa was saying, what we were really seeking to discover in this research was the impact that this course design had on students' self-perception of expertise, which is tied to confidence and tied to engagement. In transitioning students from information consumers to knowledge creators, we understood the opportunity for increased engagement, but wanted to understand the how and to what extent that increase was taking place. So for a survey instrument, we decided on a printed survey that would be distributed during the last class session. The survey had 27 questions total, which were collaboratively designed between Paul, Lisa, and myself. There were elements of the survey with a foundation of self-efficacy scaling and several open-ended qualitative questions related to perceptions and feelings surrounding the course configuration and knowledge of Creative Commons licensing.
Yes.
Oh, hey, thanks, Kim. There's that guide. And also any of the survey instruments that we show are available. Everything we do is open, CC BY, this presentation, everything, all the time. So anything you see here is available for you to use. And here specifically is an excerpt of the confidence scoring component of the survey, which was based on self-efficacy rankings. We used the CATME 5.0 as the foundation for that. And so these self-efficacy rankings were related specifically to fundamental, intermediate, and ultimate learning outcomes, which basically, I mean, a lot of people approach that like, novice, moderate, expert, like that kind of scaling, like 1, 2, 3, like just getting started, feeling okay, or like, yes, I got this. So here are some of the qualitative open-ended questions that I mentioned related to that we asked the students that were related to their perceived understanding of the course content and how their understanding of licensing may have been impacted by the final course assignment. So in an effort to find out what motivated the students to succeed in the course, we asked the students what they cared about the most in the class. Not surprisingly, 100% of the respondents, and the response rate was, quick math, 20 of 23, pretty high response rate. But 100% of the students reported that they cared about grades the most because that's a common success metric. That's how you pass the class. That's, you get the grade, you get your credit, you advance. However, we also noted that the other two things that students cared about the most categorically were about the audience of their podcasts, who would be listening to them, and also knowing that these podcasts would be released to the public and likely used as teaching objects for future cohorts of the same class. They were also concerned about their ability to create something that would help others to learn. And so in reviewing some of the specific quotes from these surveys, we additionally heard students saying things like, they wanted high quality, accurate details in their podcast, knowing that others could listen to it online. I don't want to mislead anyone. And I did in-depth research in historiography, but applied modern social science theory. So I'm seeing the broader application of content. And I learned more about copyright and the various levels of Creative Commons licensing so that I have a new appreciation of legal uses for material, both quoting and citing and editing for personal use. So we were very encouraged by these results. And it was an indication to us that more research is necessary for potential expansion of perception-based inquiry, as well as possibly seeking out cross-institutional, interinstitutional, lots of collaborations. There are lots of opportunities here. So Lisa's going to talk a little bit more about how and where we've shared our findings thus far.
Right. So now, as I said, we had done this in, I guess we started in 2018, at least the planning for it. And when we actually, the class itself took place at that time. So we had at least, 2019, we didn't know what was coming, but, at least we did have that opportunity that year to disseminate our research in various different ways. So our first opportunity was actually the Creative Commons Global Summit 2019, which took place in Lisbon. And then while we were there, we met up with someone else who was organizing an open education global meeting in Milan, which would take place it was November. So the Creative Commons one was in May, and then the open education in Milan was in November, December, whatever. And then we at the same time, we got this opportunity to write the chapter for the Rebus book, Open Pedagogy. And there was also a webinar that we did for the State University of New York on open educational resources, and that was in December 2019. And luckily we got a chance to do all that before this pandemic hit, because who knows, like it would be quite a different environment now. So we were very lucky that we did it when we did. And of course, the book chapter was eventually published by Rebus in June of 2020, I believe. So that's been also available since then. And then this, and I'm sure there will be other opportunities as well, either in person or online, which we're looking forward to. So if anyone has any ideas about that, feel free to get in touch with us. Okay, so that is all that we have to say as part of the formal presentation. You can see the three of us here in our Twitter information as well. And so you see it, Paul Musgrave is, he was the instructor, the faculty member in the political science department that we worked with. And he unfortunately has not been able to come with us to these various locations to present, because he's been very busy with all his other stuff. But his information is there as well. And I encourage you to follow him on Twitter, because he's pretty prolific on Twitter, and he's got some really good things to say. And so you can hear more from him. And we also have the student podcast link there, which I guess we can also put into the, I can't do it myself, but you can put it into the chat, and you can listen to them all, because that's what they're there for.
You can leave it up, because that way, in case it'll give us time to, there we are. So Sarah can get the scholar works up. Yeah, now you can, I think you can stop sharing.
Trying to get the link in there.
There we are. Now, yeah, if you stop sharing, then we can all see each other. And as folks want to put questions for Lisa and Sarah in the chat, I will start, if that's okay. One of the things I thought was really interesting that united these is the sort of what I see as issues of justice, of valuing students, right, getting away from them as consumers, but as full ethical beings, and thinking about those choices, whether it is about access, but also about the value of being a creator. And I was wondering, Sarah and Lisa, in having those conversations about the pivot from I am a student and my job is to give something just to my professor, and then that's the end. How did you find, do you have any interesting maybe stories about how they showed that change from I am part of a different sort of creative group? I don't know, that's a vague question. I toss it to you.
Well, we didn't do interviews with the students. Unfortunately, we didn't, that's one of the things that we would like to do in future iterations of this study. But I think some of the, part of the survey was there was like the open text, kind of open text. I know that's very confusing, but they could just write what they wanted and make their comments. And I think Sarah had she had read out some of those, and it did seem like, at least with some of them, it did actually like have, you know, a specific impact on like, oh, I know that people are going to be reading this, so I better just really, you know, hunker down and make sure that I do it 100% right, and not just, you know, however much work I need to do in order to pass, right? So they did have a little bit more of that motivation to work just that much harder. Now their reputation, because you know their names are on it too, right? Even with the Wikipedia articles, they can still, you know, edit under a pseudonym, or they don't have to use their real names. But this one, their name is on there, so it's their, you know, reputation as scholars as well. Right. Sarah, was there something you wanted to add?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so there was the, you know, after we conducted this study, of course, there was like the post-mortem conversation, and what do we want to do next time? What could we have done differently? And surveys was a big part of it. Member checking was a big part of it. For those who are not as deeply entrenched in assessment, that's basically, you know, you bake in the capability when you start doing the research, that you make that agreement and consent with your participants that you can go back and ask them more questions later. And we had so many unanswered questions. And so one of the things that I definitely benefited from as a researcher from that is, you know, kind of seeing what we wish we could have done. And I've been baking that into the research I've been doing for my dissertation, which is a hermeneutic phenomenological study, which is there's going to be a series of interviews, in-depth interviews with students in a linguistics course this spring. And it's creative scholarship. It's recognizing the student voice as scholars, as knowledge creators, and having those in-depth conversations, building upon the encouraging feedback we've already received, but asking some more of those targeted questions that Lisa was just talking about, with the hope that, it's even more encouraging news. And maybe we could, scale up the research and all that good stuff. But, because I'm in the midst of writing a dissertation, I recognize that I can bluster on for way too long about it. So I'm going to.
Oh, well, I will ask a follow-up. I don't know if many folks, we University of Rochester often, when we're not in COVID times, works with international baccalaureate students at the high school level. And that very much reflects what you presented on, which is this idea of that power of reflection and of autonomy and of responsibility to, if you have an idea, to follow an idea, that's really a valuable thing. And I just wanted to say that's awesome. Oh, and Elaine has a question. Did the faculty member include a reflection component as an assessment in the course for students, or was that more formative part of discussion?
I actually can't remember if we did or not. I would have to go back in the chapter. We each wrote sort of a part of it, and he wrote about, his part is the instructor in creating the assignment and the syllabus and that sort of thing. So I think he would have, he definitely would have said something about that. Mm-hmm. I just can't recall now because
following up, Deirdre, did you have a formal rubric for the podcast?
Yeah, again, that would be something that would be more of Paul. If he didn't necessarily share it with us, but obviously he must have had some kind of rubric.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I don't know if we linked out to the syllabus or not. It wasn't as formally structured because also, again, it was an honors course, and they have a tendency to be a little more, I guess, expository in that sense, less prescriptive. Oh, start seeing Marilyn. So yeah, it was more of just like a more open-ended in that sense, and also because it was a group assignment, like it was more focused on fostering that group dynamic and the research component. So far as the I just wanted to mention too that anytime we conduct additional assessment in a class, we're cognizant of having assessment fatigue, because there's also what we refer to as the CERTIs, which are the end of semester assessment that all courses go through, where it's like, how prepared was your instructor, and instructors can put additional questions on top of that. I know Paul did not in this case, but that was another layer that the students had on top of that. So like Lisa said, I think that the best thing is to review specifically how Paul outlined that, but I'm 99% sure is, more of that reflective conversation over the course of the semester, not a tool.
I think that highlights, and what I like about having Dennis and Neringa and Doreen at the beginning, right? The difference between what happens at a 100 level course and honors level course, right? The freedom in some ways, how assessment looks different, how you have to have accessibility. Like if you're in an honors course and just a couple of people have some technical issues, those are really easy to solve. If you've got a class of 150, you have to make sure that those things aren't going to happen on a regular basis. So I think it's nice you two have balanced sort of the two ends of the spectrum, but also sort of putting students forward as let's be thinking about how they can best get the things that they need, whether that's the autonomy or access. I think that's fantastic. It's a fine balance. So Elaine says, when I'm working with faculty, helping them build that reflection into the work as part of active learning, as I'm an education librarian as well. So and with Kim Hoffman, who's here on this call and was one of the editors of the Open Pedagogy Approaches, having us always think about what's that reflective moment, because we learn not just when we're reading or answering things, but that when we're reflecting on it, that becomes that next step. And I think right with the podcast, I think that's a really good case of when you have to present it in a different medium, really some of those learning objectives really come through. I am going to, we can certainly still have conversations, but I'm going to share our thank you before everybody heads out. Here is, I think you can all see the right screen, but we will make this recording available, and we'll make sure that those links are clickable. That we'll have some of those links for you. And that's 2:57. Wow, we're pretty good.
We all actually stayed within the allotted time. That's very new for Sarah and myself.
Well, yeah, me too. When I first started as a cataloger, I was known as the talkative cataloger, which why I moved pretty quickly to reference.
It's I think it's a lot of the virtual, like a lot of virtual presentations and webinars. You're like so cognate, you know.
Yeah.
Green real estate too, so you could like keep your
Yep, exactly. And Kim has put the link to the recordings when they're ready.
Cool.
We encourage you to, if you haven't seen any of, I think most of you have found our presentations already, but the next one coming up, I'll just pop this here, is Open Educational Resources in the Humanities. Christian Beck, Lily Dubach, Sarah Norris, and John Vanasek from the University of Central Florida. And Brian McGeary and Christopher Gooder from Ohio will discuss harnessing the power of student-created content. So if you liked what you got here, come on back for some more.
Well, thank you for having us too.
Thank you so much, Professor.
For this.
We appreciate all of you, and we appreciate the audience. It's been fun.
Yeah.